Okay, let's talk about what's generally happening internationally with a bit of global risk aversion. It seems to be creeping through a major sell-off of commodities. What's fueled that?
Well, I think, yeah, you're right. I mean, the commodities have really been selling off, led down by silver and oil particularly. Yeah. And that's led the world to get the jitters once again, as we had earlier in the year. So there was a massive sell-off in risk overall. Which is a problem, and as we know for Africa, the way that manifests itself for Africa is not necessarily in bad performance, but in low volume. So that's a bit frustrating for us, I suppose, but it is the reality. And I think the other thing you've got to consider is that there've been a lot of holidays, not only in Africa, but globally. So we've definitely seen that sell-off, and despite the bounce on Friday with the non-farm numbers from the US, we've still seen some very low volumes across Africa.
Let's underscore risk and what could be perpetuating this idea that things are not well within the global economy.
Well, I think you've had concerns obviously over the oil price recently, and still the Middle East worries. We obviously thought with bin Laden getting captured or killed rather, a week or two ago, that would fuel risk to actually develop. But I think investors have just thought to take money off the table, to sit tight and see where we go from here.
Okay, which bourses have defied those risk sentiments and done well? Zambia, it seems.
Well, that's an interesting one, actually, Zambia, because it's the best performing market across Africa, which is unusual because out of the commodity exporters, it's always up there at the top. So it's very unusual. However, again, you're looking at low volume, so it's very difficult to make a proper assessment of that. In fact, today it was down about 8%, so you can see a total reversal today. Zanaco, out of all the big caps, was about the only one that really traded, and that traded up. So I think that skewed the index to the upside.
Zim Mining seems to have done well. It's been pulled up by Rio Zim. Now, I find this fascinating because at the World Economic Forum, Morgan Tsvangirai was quoted as saying that basically we shouldn't be jittery and nervous about indigenization, which is almost a tacit endorsement.
Correct. But what you say and what you actually get and what investors believe and invest in can be two different things. And in fact, this is the decoupling that we were talking about earlier, was the mining did really well, but the Zim Industrial, which remember is the core index, did very badly and was in fact one of the worst performers. So mining had a pleasing little bounce, but again, that was from Rio Zim, as you said. But overall, investors are still concerned about the political situation in Zim.
Right. Nigeria, I mean, we've seen low volumes, obviously, so that's something to factor in. But why is this market returning to positivity?
Well, it's a pleasing return to positivity for all of us, I think. When investors look at Africa or sub-Saharan Africa, ex-South Africa, Nigeria is always the first point of call because it's the biggest market. So we've seen low volumes. However, the well-known names have been obviously positive about South Africa. The World Economic Forum was positive about Africa and the potential. So we're seeing some buying from sort of the usual suspects coming back in and being happy to.
And a little bit more clarity now about which of the rescued banks are likely to be taken over, what consolidation means. But we've also got a new head for the Nigeria Stock Exchange and a new team. Has that buoyed the markets?
Absolutely, yes. As we all know, one of the biggest concerns about Nigeria is the transparency. And what they've really strived to do by hiring Oscar is to really show that they are trying to go down the transparent route, because for international investors, that's what they really require out of the country.
Decoupling is a word that you've used earlier on, and I'd like you to explain it in the context of what's happening in North Africa. Morocco seems to have done well, and I can't understand it in the context of proximity to both Tunisia and Egypt, and also in the context of recent terror attacks inside of Morocco.
Correct. Well, the reason I use the word decoupling is because often you find markets in the same regions tend to move in the same direction. So for example, if the northeast markets are doing well, North Africa markets are doing well, most of the markets will do well. And we've seen very interesting, and we spoke about Zim Mining and Industrial, which also is an indication of that. But what we saw, as you say, Morocco, the terrorist attacks recently really pulled down the index. So we've seen a lot of investors returning and then starting to buy again. Tunisia, we're going back to the old problem of the issues, as we know. And then also we've had some poor Q1 business numbers come out, and that's really pulled down that market. So you can see one's going up, one's going down. It's very fascinating.
Let's talk about the worst performers, the BRVM. What's happening there? Because now we've had political settlement, and we're seeing the Ouattara administration just doing everything that it can to just neutralize the situation politically and really just open the country up for business.
Yes, well, the company is starting to open up again, and I see shipments from Abidjan and San Pedro are now coming online, which is great. what we've seen, obviously the market's been closed for a couple of months now, so I think what happened was investors were just a bit scared, and as it opened, they've sold off. However, we've got a bit of stability now, and as we know, Sonatel, which is the biggest market cap there, is now a bit stable at 155,000. So it's quite pleasing. I think it was just the first week back where everyone's back, banks, custodians, etc., the name sold off.
What's happening in South Africa and Namibia? Because obviously those two markets are generally interlinked in terms of South African companies being dual listed in Namibia and the Namibian currency often tracking the rand.
Correct, yeah, those two markets are very closely linked and very closely linked to risk. So obviously globally, risk aversion impacts negatively on South Africa and Namibia. And the commodity price as well. You've got to remember South Africa, again, a big commodity exporter. So we saw really the worst sectors were resources, gold, platinum. So again, it's definitely a risk play there.
Okay, and you guys have also pointed out Tunisia and Egypt. Let's go back to North Africa. We've started to see violent protests on the street with people unhappy with how the transitional process is unfolding in Tunisia. You talk about poor results for Q1. Obviously, business hasn't been particularly active in the midst of the political environment. Is the worst yet to come?
Well, I'm not sure, and hopefully not, actually, Loretta. Egypt, yes, there were some clashes, and we had a very poor day yesterday on the markets. There were clashes between Muslims and Christians, which is never good to see. And Tunisia, as you say, there were the bad Q1 indicators. And then there were also comments from the ex-interior minister about if the opposition government gets in, the military might overthrow the government. So who knows if the worst is behind us, I don't know.